stress on the brain will cause output of energy into the body that affects all your organs. It seems that some people have the propensity to discharge brain stress into various parts of their body. The brain, I think, has only a certain capacity to hold on to nervous energy, then it has to discharge it into the body. So there's a definite mind-body connection. A lot of people channel their stress into their heart.
You see, the heart is an electrical organ. It produces by far the strongest source of bioelectricity in our body, up to 40 to 60 times stronger than the second most powerful source, which is the brain. This electrical energy travels through every single cell in our body and in a sense kind of binds the cells together. It's strong enough that it even can be detected outside the body, out into space, beyond the skin. It's not an aura that we're measuring when we do this, or anything like subtle energy. What it is very measurable electromagnetic energy, much like radio waves. And what we found is that the heart produces an electromagnetic field that surrounds our entire body in 360 degrees. And that it can be detected about 3 to 4 feet with magnetometers outside the body. Researchers at the Manager Clinic in Kansas say they've detected it 10 to 12 feet. So regardless of how far it goes, what's interesting is that we produce this electromagnetic field that can be detected. It can be measured with sensitive mainstream medical equipment. What we found is that the frequencies in that field, the electromagnetic energy and the frequencies that are in the radiation from the heart, actually change depending upon what we are feeling. Our emotional state influences changes in that electromagnetic signature. For instance, if we're feeling a strong negative emotion like anger or frustration, it creates what researchers call an incoherent spectra in that electromagnetic field. Lots of different frequencies fighting for power. The pattern looks very jagged and irregular, kind of like you'd see if you were looking at a pattern of an earthquake. And we see that kind of electromagnetic signature again when people are feeling these negative emotions. The good news is that we see a completely different kind of feel when people are feeling positive emotions. Really heart-based emotions, emotions that have long been metaphorically associated with heart. For instance, if we're feeling real genuine appreciation or sincere care or real compassion, what we see in that field is what's called a harmonic spectra. The frequencies are now working together. They create what's called a harmonic sequence. They're not fighting for power, they're supporting one another. And all of these changes occur because of what we do as human beings. The emotional qualities that we are bringing to life affect that field. Now you take that a step further. The field surrounds us in 360 degrees. We're broadcasting that energy, first of all, to our own bodies, but we're also sending it out into space. So in a sense, we are communicating our emotions through an electromagnetic field produced by the heart. So there's a lot more research to be done on this because now we've moved beyond biology into physics. Now we're into electromagnetic fields. How do these fields affect one another? How do they affect each other? These are all interesting questions that we have ongoing research to come up with definitive answers for. And I think it's just the beginning. I think that what we're measuring is some of the densest energy produced by the heart, and that there's another subtle energy component of heart that's far more powerful, far more interesting, and that radiates far beyond just a few feet. And all that will be discovered in the next few years.
As human beings, each one of us is characterized by our own vibrational frequency, which is a reflection of the proteins in creating our biology. The significance is that as individuals with individual frequencies, there are some people whose frequencies are more complementary or more matching than other individuals whose frequencies are quite different. The relevance to this is that matching frequencies or complementary frequencies interact with each other and actually, in the terms of physics, interfere with each other. And as two very closely related frequencies come together, their interference patterns result in an enhancement of the field itself, a powering of that field. So this is called constructive interference, and allows two individuals that are closely related to communicate across this field. The most characteristic and easily understood communication is that it usually occurs between a mother and her child. which are, of course, very much connected to each other. And in fact, the child has cells from the mother in it because of the developmental processes that occur during fetal development. And more importantly, the mother has stem cells from her child in her body as a result of fetal development as well, so that both the mother and the child are actually sharing cells with the same receptor frequencies on them. And as a result, and this is very interesting because mothers will report this, that they will know if something is wrong with their child no matter where their child is on the planet. And what I saw was, I read it in a book called Understanding Your Microprocessor, a simpleton book about how to use a computer. Basically, the definition, liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels, is the exact same definition of a computer chip. What this all led to was a very simple and yet very profound understanding. The cell is an information processor because the membrane reads the environment and adjusts the biology. The nucleus of the cell with its genes represents a hard disk, and the genes are programs. Our old belief system is that the nucleus and its programs were read-only memory, so that whatever the genes are, that would be our fate. However, the new insights offered revealed that the nucleus of the cell was not read-only, it was actually read-write. So basically, the cell was a programmable device. You'd put it into an environment, it would read the environment, and then adjust the expression of the genes to match the needs of that environment. So taking genetically identical cells and putting one set into a culture with certain environmental conditions caused the cell to program itself as a muscle cell, and a genetically identical cell put in yet another environment, reading the constituents of that environment would lead to the expression of a bone cell. So basically, the cells are programmable in response to environmental information.
Scientific studies have shown the heart is not only the most powerful center in the body, it is the most intelligent, having the ability to receive precognition. If we can create a coherence with our minds and heart center, we can access our intuition more frequently.
One of the interesting studies that was done here at the Institute of Heart Math with our chief researcher, Dr. Roland McCready, was a study on intuition, on the intuitive response. And in that study, they had test subjects that were placed in front of a computer, and they were wired up. They were looking at brain waves, they were looking at galvanic skin response, they were looking at readings from the heart rate variability analysis, and things like that. The test subject would push a button, and there would be a delay before the picture would appear on the screen of the computer. And the computer was randomly selecting the pictures. No one knew, no one could know what the computer was going to select. Some of the pictures were pleasant, and some were horrific. What we found was that in many cases, the body started responding to the upcoming picture, responding in the way it would normally to the upcoming picture, about 6 seconds prior to the picture actually showing up on the screen. 6 seconds prior, the body began to do what it would do if the picture was there. It was a very, very complicated study, a very detailed study, published in 2 parts in the Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. The data analysis showed something very, very interesting. It showed that when that response began, that the first part of our physiology that was doing sort of the intuitive or precognitive response was actually the heart. The heart was responding before the brain. It began to go through a deceleration process that would be compatible with the picture that was going to come up. About 1.5 seconds later, the brain began to do what it does in regards to that picture. But within the human system, at the physiological level, measuring that intuitive response to an upcoming event, it was the heart that responded first. And as I read the summary of that study, I found it fascinating, because what the summary basically said was that it appears as if an upcoming event is significant or emotional, that we have a tendency to be able to sense that or to respond to it before it actually occurs. And that our biology has the capacity and does in many ways scan for the future events. It's constantly scanning for future events, but that it's something we're not aware of. We don't know that it's there. We don't know that we do it. But the punchline was it would be very useful for us to develop that.
And is that these receptors that receive an identity are on the outer surface of the cell. The relevance to that is that whatever the self signal is, it is out in the environment and picked up by these receptors. Significance to my perception in this is that our identities are not within our biology. Our identities are part of a field, and that our biology downloads this information from the field. So the significance is that when we talk about our personal identity, we can talk about that identity isolated and localized with our physical body, but we could also talk about the same information or identity that is present in the field. So, for example, Cleve Baxter did some wonderful experiments where he took cells from an individual, put them in a culture dish, and separated those cells from that individual by a distance of 40 or more miles. And what he had was an experiment where he put electrical devices to read the electrical activity of the cells in the culture dish. At the same time, he was reading the electrical activity, for example, the EEG activity of the donor of those cells who was 40 miles away. What he recognized is that if the individual had an emotional experience at that moment, the individual cells would also have an identical kind of activity occur instantaneously at the same time, even though they were 40 miles away. The relevance about this is really very supportive of the fact that the identity is not localized within the body. The identity is part of the field and spread all over the surface of the planet. Significance is that then two people have two physical bodies and they can interact, but they also have two environmental identifications, meaning some kind of energy in the field that is unique to them. Since the field is all entangled and integrated with each other all over the world, that means people are never really separated from each other by physical distances in regard to their personal identity, even though their bodies may be separated. So basically, the nature of people communicating with each other is to recognize that individual identities as vibrational frequencies in a field can interact with each other, especially if there's something called harmonic resonance, meaning the two frequencies share wavelengths together so that when they come together they vibrate together. And this is how people can actually feel other people that are closely related to them, because they can pick up the vibration of the other individual in that there's a complementarity between them and the person they're communicating with.
The goal is, over the next 2 to 3 years, maybe a little longer depending on how fast the project moves, is we want to put between 50 and 100 of these sensors around the globe, have them all network back to a central location, and be able to get a complete picture of the ionosphere 24/7. Our belief is that when there are large numbers of people feeling similar emotions, mass emotional output, that could be detectable in the ionosphere. We want to conduct experiments on the effect of positive emotional states being generated by large numbers of people on the Earth itself. In a sense, sort of metaphorically, what we're attempting to do is to measure the brain waves and heart rhythms of the planet itself.